Okay, my name is Fred Trotter. I'm an open source healthcare software developer, and every time I go to a conference, there's a couple things that just absolutely surprise me about what the open source community has done. I'm standing here with Dr. John Madison, who is the Chief Medical Information Officer of Kaiser Permanente, Southern California. And I found out just about a week ago, I think, that they were releasing an open source ontology. Now, a lot of people who are in healthcare software deep know exactly what an ontology is. A lot of people don't know what that means. But ultimately, an ontology is just a dictionary of terms that allow people to make, to do medicine in an accurate and well-described way. But in the United States, most of our ontologies are proprietary, which is to say you have to pay money and licensing fees. This actually ends up being crippling for the open source community because we can't ship open source projects based on American ontologies internationally, and it creates a divide between the international open source healthcare software community and the domestic open source healthcare software community, which is really tragic. So when I heard there was going to be an open source ontology of any kind released, I was super excited, and I wanted the audience to understand why I thought that was so critical before I asked my question. So what is the ontology, and how are you releasing it, who you're releasing it with, and what licenses are you using?
Great, so several questions in there. The first is the licensing arrangement is Apache 2, and so that's the mechanism by which we're open sourcing it. Anybody who wishes to use any of the components that we're donating, and I'll enumerate those components in a second, can license them either for the U.S. market through the National Library of Medicine under Health and Human Services, and internationally through ITSIDU, the International Healthcare Terminology Standards Development Organization, which is the successor to the SNOMED International Organization. So what we have done with this set of tools, and the C in CMT stands for Convergent Medical Terminology, is we have worked for nearly 2 decades on doing mappings between different terminologies and establishing sets of reference terminology using existing standards like ICD and CPT and SNOMED, and then interface terminology terms which are much more natural language based, much friendlier to the physician and to the clinician for clinical documentation, and we're mapping those to a set that is consumer friendly so that when we reveal clinical information to an individual patient in their personal health record, that there's alignment of the problem that the physician registers with the problem that the patient sees on their own personal health record. But there are certain instances where it doesn't make sense to use the same language. As an example, hypertension might be represented as 401.9 as an ICD term in the machine-readable portion. It may be represented as HTN as an acceptable way of representing it in interface terminology for a physician, but when a patient sees it, we would spell out hypertension, the full word. There are many other examples like RUQ pain would become right upper quadrant pain in consumer-friendly terminology, but yet both of those would map to the same machine-readable reference terminology in the existing standards. So the 3 components that I alluded to that we've donated are all of the terms that we've created, both reference, interface, and consumer terminology, the mappings between them, and mappings among several of the existing standards like SNOMED, ICD, and CPT. We're giving all of the content to both the International Healthcare Terminology Standards Development, and they in turn give it through pre-existing contract to the National Library of Medicine, which makes it freely available throughout the United States market. In addition, the National Library of Medicine maintains a robust set of mappings between the terminologies, so all of our additional mappings will be brought into that sphere. So there are some pre-existing arrangements around allowing open source type access to some of these terminology sets, and we're contributing to all those. And the third thing that we're contributing is a set of utilities that help support a collaborative development environment. So our basic philosophy is that nobody should be competing by virtue of using different terminology sets for clinical care. It makes no sense. When we go to roll up information from multiple PHRs, multiple EHRs, so that any clinician or any patient can have a complete set of information, that is marked up using the same language, that is represented using consistent machine-readable terms as well as terms that are friendly to them as a clinician or them as a consumer, that there would be one set of atomic terms that everybody can work on. So what this does for the developer community is it allows all of the independent efforts that are creating their own ontologies and terminology sets to work collaboratively in a single environment, so that the volume of work for any individual contributor is much less and everybody benefits from the whole. So as Anish Chopra was saying this morning, with the Open Data Initiative, the federal government, where NOAA releases, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration releases all their weather data, and numerous vendors take that open source data and use it for multiple secondary purposes and applications. This is very akin to that same model, where we can have a single common base of clinical terms, physician-friendly, computer-friendly, and consumer-friendly, and build applications and services on top of that. I've already been approached by vendors in all of those spaces who are very anxious to get access to this body of work as quickly as possible. We have a schedule as to when there is a large body of work, and so we are packaging it, productizing it, and delivering it to the IHT-SDO and to the National Library of Medicine on a schedule incrementally over the next months and years. And as soon as they get it, they will make it available through their existing structures. And so the National Library of Medicine will administer the Apache 2 licenses for the United States.